Welcome back to Martial Arts in Chinese Literature and Films. In this lecture, we'll talk about Stephen Chow, his nonsensical comedy and the art of parody, Hong Kong pop culture, and the film in which you'll see all these themes coming together, Kung Fu Hustle. Stephen Chow's Chinese name is Zhou Xingshi. His Chinese fans today often call him Grandmaster Sing or Xingye, since the commonly acknowledged king of comedy in Chinese language cinema. Stephen Chow was born in 1962 in Hong Kong. His parents divorced when he was young, and he was living with his mother after the divorce. When he was 9, he saw Bruce Lee's film Big Boss, which inspired him to become a martial arts actor. Even though Stephen Chow has been known for his comedy rather than kung fu films, he has had extensive training in martial arts. Due to his worship of Bruce Lee, he formerly studied with the disciple of Ip Man, Bruce Lee's master and the founder of the Wing Chun style. You are able to tell he got skills by the way he fights and moves in Kung Fu Hustle and other films. After graduating high school, Stephen Chow became an actor and television host at TVB. The full name of TVB is Television Broadcasts and has been known on the mainland as 香港无线电视. TVB was established in the 1960s and created numerous popular television dramas in the 1980s and 1990s. In 1988, Stephen Chow landed in a supporting role in a crime film called The Final Justice, 霹雳先锋. For his stellar performance in this film, he was nominated for the Best Supporting Actor category for the Hong Kong Film Award, or 香港金像奖, the most prestigious film award in Hong Kong. Stephen Chow thus began to turn towards the big screen. Initially, the films he acted in were mostly crime films, which were then tremendously popular in Hong Kong. However, as an actor, he had a particular knack for comedy, and his performance often added comedic elements to these crime films. In 1990, Stephen Chow became the lead character in All the Winners, 赌圣, a comedy film about gamblers. This film dominated Hong Kong box office and made Stephen Chow one of the hottest stars of the day. Riding on the success of this film, Stephen Chow appeared either as a lead character or supporting character in 9 more films during that very year. Stephen Chow continued to be startlingly prolific in 1991, making 9 films, and then 7 in 1992. His pace slowed down afterwards, but only comparatively speaking, as he continued to act as the lead character in 3 films per year on average, up to around 2000. Throughout the 1990s, Stephen Chow also became more and more involved in the creation, production, and direction of his films. Through these involvements, he was able to develop a very distinctive style of comedy of his own that came to be called nonsensical, mo lai tao comedy. Mo lai tao is a Cantonese term that basically means making no sense, nonsense, absurd, or simply stupid. It has been used in Cantonese-based local dialects as a curse word. Before Stephen Chow's films, there were certain mo lai tao subcultures in Hong Kong through forms such as ridiculous speeches in radio shows or TV comedies. However, Stephen Chow solidified the idea of mo lai tao as a comedy style and spread it far beyond Hong Kong, first to the mainland and then globally. In addition to slapstick comedy and a great deal of physical humor, Stephen Chow's mo lai tao comedy is built on principles including incongruity and parody. Incongruity basically means a mismatch between the beginning and the end, or between appearance and action, such as when someone claims to be rich but acts in a very stingy manner. Incongruity can easily become disorienting or can easily get old if a formula becomes repetitive. Stephen Chow is a master of this principle, since he can always come up with a clever and creative scenario and execute it with excellent timing and storytelling. On a deeper level, other than a good laugh, these moments remind us of the difference between image and substance and unsettles our habitual assumptions. The martial heroes with rather unheroic images in Kung Fu Hustle exemplify this implication of Stephen Chow's comedy. Parody could be understood as a bad or failed copy of something, but can be done purposefully to poke fun at or comment on the original. To a large extent, it's about resituating the original, often a familiar or established cultural image, within an incongruent situation. For instance, the comedic effects of The Simpsons often depend on parody, such as when Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic poem The Raven, which is supposed to be melancholic and lyrical, is retold through a ridiculously cartoonish character. The more risque South Park is another example in which there is an abundance of parody. Parody also very much categorizes politically oriented comedies, such as Saturday Night Live. Being able to poke fun at national leaders is certainly a cultural feature of democracy. Through comedy, these skits may often serve as a vehicle of political critique or voicing public opinions. Even when the significance is not political, comedies such as those in The Simpsons tear the subjects being parodied down from pedestal, reducing its status to a level equal to or lower than the viewer. Literary critics have been interested in parody as a special form of cultural practice and have discussed it as follows. Parody is imitation with a critical difference, not always at the expense of the parodied text. In another definition, we see that parody is any cultural practice which provides a relatively polemical allusive imitation of another cultural production or practice. These are useful definitions to keep in mind. In contrast to the critical connotations of satire, parody is relatively neutral. It creates a critical difference from the original without necessarily condemning it. In fact, it may even rejuvenate the original by resituating it in the context of the local and the everyday, that is, the here and now, as we'll discuss further with regards to Stephen Chow's films. Indeed, Stephen Chow's parody knows no borders. On the one hand, some of his films parody Hollywood films. One example is the homemade 007. The official English title is From Beijing with Love, 国产007. This film reenacts a Bond-like plot in a local, comedic context. At the same time, the subject of his parody also includes other popular Hong Kong films, including those by his idol Bruce Lee. In 1991, one of the many films Stephen Chow made in that year is the new Fist of Fury, 新精武门. This film contains a parody of the iconic scenes concerning the Sick Man of East Asia sign in Lee's film. Now, please pause here and watch a 3-minute clip below this lecture video. That clip compares the scenes from Bruce Lee's Fist of Fury and Stephen Chow's new Fist of Fury. What happens in the latter case is a film within the film, as the scenes shows the process and mishap that happen while the Stephen Chow character is acting as Chen Zhen in a remake of The Fist of Fury. Comedic elements in this scene includes making the script obvious and highlighting the materiality of the prop, paper. Rather than just respecting Bruce Lee or the history of national humiliation being represented, this segment resituates this familiar scene within a more realistic scenario of the everyday world. In terms of a characterization, this type of parody shows the contrast between Chow's character, who is more like an everyman, and the sublime masculinity and ideals embodied by Bruce Lee. This helps set up the protagonist as an unlikely hero. In fact, across Chow's films, there is a zero to hero story, or a focus on the outcast or the underdog. What's also quite interesting is that the characters he portrays often have names quite similar to his own. Xing in Kung Fu Hustle is based on the character Xing in Chow's own name. This indicates his films often have a semi-autobiographical dimension. This tendency is especially strong in his film King of Comedy, 喜剧之王, which alludes to his own acting career. Chow's films also feature traditional topics. His most influential works of this kind are the two Chinese Odyssey, 大话西游 films made in 1995, which are based on characters and themes from the journey to the West. Using a postmodern approach and through a story of reincarnations and time travels, Chinese Odyssey creates a new approach of adapting Journey to the West, especially the story of the Monkey King, as an allegory of love, romance, and self-transformation. In the 1990s, Chow's films, in particular the Chinese Odyssey series, became phenomenally successful in the mainland, first as an internet-fused subculture among college students. Likely, Chow's mulatto films were especially refreshing and liberating for mainland students during the period, in a culture filled with serious topics. Scholars have characterized this trend since the late 1990s, the Stephen Chow phenomenon, 周星驰热. Apparently, this phenomenon is still continuous. In 2017, the Chinese Odyssey films made 22 years earlier were shown in theaters in China, with a few previously unreleased scenes. Within 4 days, their box office earnings skyrocketed beyond 100 million RMB, or roughly 15 million US dollars. In 2000, Stephen Chow gained much international attention with his Shaolin Soccer, 少林足球, and was featured on the Asian version of the Time magazine that year. Following on this success, Stephen Chow released Kung Fu Hustle in 2004 as a co-production of the Beijing Film Studio and Hong Kong Star Overseas, which is his own film company. Columbia Pictures is the US distributor of the film. In the making and marketing of this film, we can clearly see a collaboration across Hong Kong, the mainland, and the US or global market. Other than acting as the protagonist Xing in the film, Stephen Chow is the producer, director, and scriptwriter of Kung Fu Hustle. All aspects of this film are very much his own creation. It has been said that Chow kept revising the script and spent years on improving it. The shooting of the film was also a painstaking process, as Chow asked all actors to perfectly execute what he had in mind. The result is a classic film with Chow's strong personal signature. Every scene is crafted with the utmost care, to the point that viewers would feel that this is a film you can start watching any moment and remain equally engaging. The Chinese title of Kung Fu Hustle is simply Kung Fu or Gong Fu. This title indicates that it pays homage to the tradition of Kung Fu films, which became an ingrained part of Hong Kong pop culture. In addition to alluding to a local history of Kung Fu cinema, The film is also filled with references or parodies of US films. In fact, the whole plot of the film can be read as a parody of The Matrix. With all these playful allusions, Kung Fu Hustle can be thought of as a meta-film of sort. Yet at the same time, the film is also laden with images of history and reflections of traditional philosophies. Considering the significance of the martial arts popular culture to Hong Kong as a whole, Kung Fu Hustle can even be viewed as an homage to Hong Kong itself. For seeing these historical and cultural themes, let's first briefly review the history of Hong Kong and its special position in modern Chinese history. This history is closely tied to China's century of humiliation, since the Hong Kong island was ceded to British rule as part of the terms of the Nanjing Treaty after Qing China's defeat in the First Opium War in 1842. Back then, the Hong Kong island was mostly an area of fishing villages, and the British colonized the region in order to have a port for cargo transportation. The name of Hong Kong, the Mandarin pronunciation of which is Xianggang, literally means the fragrant harbor or the incense harbor, likely referring to the incense or spice trade active around the area. In 1860, after Qing government's defeat in the Second Opium War, the Qing court further ceded to the British rule the Kowloon Peninsula, which is connected to the mainland and across the strait from the Hong Kong island. Hong Kong was the first Chinese territory colonized by foreign powers, and hence became a symbol of the nation's loss of sovereignty. In 1885, Huang Zunxian, the most important diplomat of late Qing China, passed Hong Kong on his way returning from San Francisco. Upon the sight of British flags there, he wrote the following poem. On reaching Hong Kong, the water belongs to the time of the sage King Yao, and the sun remains the same as the time of the Xiao dynasty. The robe and cap I wear are those of Han officials. Climbing a tower, I look around. This is truly my land. Yet on the great flags, I cannot find the image of our yellow dragon. And here is how the poem sounds in Chinese. 到香港，水是瑶石，日下时，衣冠又是汉官仪。登楼四望真无土，不见黄龙上大旗。One may say Huang's narrative is not entirely accurate here. For instance, he was wearing an official uniform according to the Manchu rather than Han Chinese custom. The image of a uniform national history and identity in the poem is more or less mythical, meaning to express the author's patriotism. The yellow dragon flag refers to the Qing dynasty national flag. It's a yellow flag with the image of a blue dragon. The flag was designed and adopted in 1862, following the example of European national flags. In 1898, under persistent pressures from Britain, the Qing government agreed to give Britain a 99-year lease of the so-called New Territories, Xinjie, which include over 200 outlying small islands in the waters near Hong Kong, and a significant portion of mainland area. In fact, these new territories account for 90% of the land area of the Hong Kong we know today. To summarize, Hong Kong in fact consists of three main areas that have been colonized by Britain in succession. The Hong Kong Island in 1842, the Kowloon Peninsula in 1860, and the New Territories in 1898. Between 1941 and 1945, Hong Kong was occupied by Imperial Japan. At the conclusion of the Second World War, Britain reclaimed its colonial governance over all Hong Kong territories. After the establishment of the PRC in 1949, the Chinese government had been developing a Hong Kong strategy to reclaim Chinese sovereignty over the area. This goal materialized after the conclusion of China's Cultural Revolution, 文化大革命, in 1976, under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, the architect of China's opening up and reform. Based on his negotiations with Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister of the time, Britain would follow the 99-year term for the lease of the new territories starting in 1898, and return all Hong Kong territories to Chinese sovereignty or 主权 in 1997. Paired with the handover of Macau, Auburn, from Portugal's influences in 1999, the Hong Kong handover in 1997 symbolizes a true closure of the century of humiliation to the Chinese populace. For these former colonies, including Hong Kong and Macau, one country, two systems, 一国两制, became a guiding governing principle as devised by Deng Xiaoping. For Hong Kong itself, the legacy of its long colonial period were manifold. While marked by a history of colonization, Hong Kong grew to be a metropolis with crucial significance to China's global trade. Mingling Chinese and foreign populations, cultural practices, and languages, it became a frontier for the encounter and communication of Eastern and Western values. Politically, colonial Hong Kong was detached from Chinese authorities and many of the political upheavals in modern Chinese history. Sun Yat-sen's organization of the Republican Revolution, which overthrew the Qing dynasty, for instance, used Hong Kong as an important base. Later, when the mainland was swept by political movements such as the Great Leap Forward of the 1950s and the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976, Hong Kong was able to develop on a commercially driven trajectory, largely separated from these political forces. In these contexts, Hong Kong became the hotbed of a Chinese language popular culture between the 1950s and the 1990s, when a commercially based pop culture became impossible in mainland China during this period due to a stalled market economy and radical political movements. In many ways, Hong Kong pop culture inherited the legacies of earlier popular cultural developments from roughly the 1920s to the 1940s during the Republican period on the mainland, especially in the city of Shanghai, which became a globalized metropolis during this time. Martial arts novels or wuxia 小说 became a form of popular reading during the Republican period as well. These novels are usually very long, based on the style of older novels such as Outlaws of the Marsh, and featured heroic adventures of martial arts fighters, often set in Qing dynasty or earlier historical periods. Sometimes, these stories may be semi-fantastic, featuring powers that verge on magic and ideas drawn from the Taoist myths of immortals. As mentioned earlier, An Li's film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is based on a novel of the same title from the Republican period. Martial arts novels continue to thrive in Hong Kong and to an extent in Taiwan and overseas Chinese communities from the 1950s to the 1990s. These novels came to be called New School Martial Arts novels, 新派武侠小说. The beginning of this type of writing is often traced to Liang Yusheng, a prolific Hong Kong writer who had written over 30 long martial arts novels. However, in terms of popularity and influence, no other martial arts writer can beat Jin Yong or Louis Cha, who is likely the most widely read author of any genre in the Chinese-speaking world. Jin Yong's original name was Jia Liangyong. He came from an extremely illustrious scholar official family of the late Qing period. Jin Yong grew up on the mainland. He received a solid education in Chinese history and classics, and studied diplomacy and international politics at the top university. After graduation, he worked at Shanghai's Dagongbao, China's most influential newspaper during this time. In 1948, he was transferred to the Hong Kong office and stayed mostly in the area ever since. In 1950s, Jin Yong began to write film scripts. In 1959, he founded his own newspaper, Mingbao, which focuses on political commentaries and has grown to be one of Hong Kong's most influential news media. Jin Yong was an activist and was very involved in politics. Meanwhile, he was also a scholar and historian. He was passionate about researching Chinese history throughout his life and earned a PhD from Oxford University with a dissertation on Tang Dynasty politics in his 80s. All these facets of his personality and interests are reflected in his martial arts novels. Jin Yong initially wrote his martial arts novels to be serialized in newspapers. Later, he used his writings to sustain readership for his own newspaper, Mingbao, when it was first founded. All in all, from the 1950s to the 1970s, Jin Yong published 15 martial arts novels of various lengths. He compiled a well-known couplet incorporating the first characters of the titles of all his novels, as you can see on this slide. Deng Xiaoping, China's most important leader after the Cultural Revolution, happened to be a big fan of Jin Yong's novels. These martial arts novels were imported to the mainland in the early 1980s and became phenomenally popular. From the 1980s to the 1990s, Jin Yong and Deng Xiaoping met on several occasions, and he was consulted on policy issues during the Hong Kong handover process. For literary critics, Jin Yong's novels raised the question as to how to distinguish between serious and popular literatures, or what is true literature. There were some high-profile wars of words between him and other well-known authors of the period. Even though the jury is still out regarding Jin Yong's status in modern Chinese literary history, his social influence is undeniable for the Chinese-speaking world at large. Numerous adaptations of his novels in TV or films have been made in Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and mainland China. Stephen Chow has made films based on Jin Yong's novels and often alludes to these works, such as in Kung Fu Hustle. Jin Yong's martial arts worlds are complex and broad, certainly worthy of extensive study. There have been a few English monographs dedicated to his novels. In general, we have witnessed a thematic transition of his novels from a nationalist form of Confucianism to a cosmopolitan form of Buddhism. This contrast is quite obvious if we compare his earlier work Legend of Condor Heroes, 射雕英雄传, the first novel of the Condor trilogy, and his later work Demigods and Semi-Devils, 天龙八部, the title of which refers to Buddhist mythological beings representing human desires, sins, and suffering. Jin Yong's thinking indeed turned increasingly Buddhist during his late years, and his funeral was conducted according to the Buddhist ritual of cremation. Due to their massive length and dense references to Chinese history and culture, Jin Yong's novels do not translate very well, and he remained unknown to most Western readers. However, a high-quality but very abridged English translation of his last novel, Deer and Quadrant, 鹿鼎记, which presents a rather cynical view of history and human nature, has been published as a 3-volume set by Oxford University Press in 2018. At the moment, a full translation of Legend of Condor Heroes, 射雕英雄传, is underway, and the first volume of a planned 4-volume series has been published. Now, back to Stephen Chow's Kung Fu Hustle, which is steeped with influences of a martial arts culture crafted by authors like Jin Yong and film stars like Bruce Lee. As we have mentioned, the film also implies the history of Hong Kong itself. For this, we need to attend to the name of the slum-like neighborhood that's at the center of the film's setting, Pigsty Alley, Zhulong Chengzhai. The Cantonese pronunciation of this name is a pun on the Kowloon walled city, Jiulong Chengzhai. Historically, the Kowloon walled city was a walled Qing dynasty military fort of about 6.4 acres before the British colonization. During the complex negotiation process of leasing new territories to Britain in 1898, this walled area became an enclave that was theoretically still under Chinese jurisdiction. However, in actuality, the Chinese government was unable to or unwilling to truly regulate the area. The area experienced a series of upheavals and changes during the 20th century, gradually drawing in a population mostly consisted of impoverished households. In the 1980s, the residents in this confined area were estimated to number between 30,000 and 50,000, making it the most densely populated area of the world. Through this history, the Kowloon walled city gradually became an ungoverned area and a place practically ruled by gangsters. Infested by crimes and violence, hygiene and public service conditions within the area remain poor. In 1987, through an agreement between British and Chinese governments, residents within the area were relocated, and walls and structures of the walled city were dismantled. The site was reconstructed as a memorial park for the history of the city, and some relics from the original city have been preserved in this manner. Stephen Chow grew up in Kowloon, and the history of the Kowloon walled city was well known in the area. Other than recalling this local history, the image of this historical slum serves to evoke the image of an ungoverned nowhere land, which exists on the margins of national cultures or identities. The setting thus suggests the characteristics of Hong Kong culture itself as existing between cultures and outside mainstream political histories. As a slum, the Kowloon walled city also helps set up the image of the group of ordinary or unlikely heroes in the film. We have said that since the transitional period, martial arts stories have often been stories of the underdog or of members of the non-elite class. In Kung Fu Hustle, this is an obvious pattern. Other than the protagonist Singh's zero-to-hero transformation, the film features martial arts masters hidden within the working class, the tailor, the cook, and the coolie. The name Pigsty also evokes the history of 19th century Chinese coolies who had been called pigmen, indicating how true heroes could come from silenced and disenfranchised social groups. The landlord and the landlady are likewise unconventional heroes. Other than being a middle-aged, ungentrified couple, these characters look and act against gender conventions. In one scene of the film, the couple refer to themselves as Yang Guo and Xiaolong translated as Helen and Paris in the English caption, referring to the protagonists of the second novel in Jin Yong's Condor trilogy, The Return of the Condor Heroes, 神雕侠侣. As star-crossed lovers, these two characters embody the ideal masculine and feminine images in a martial arts romance. In using them to characterize the landlord and the landlady, Kung Fu Hustle pokes fun at these ideal images and drags them into contact with an earthlier reality. We have mentioned that Kung Fu Hustle is filled with parodies and is very much a film about films in this regard. Fans of the film have spotted allusions to American movies, including Top Hat, West Side Story, Buster Keaton's Sherlock Jr., Gangs of New York, Spider-Man, Batman, The Shining, and of course The Matrix. I wonder if you can identify these references and may be able to find more. To a large extent, these references are just for good fun, and the way Kung Fu Hustle mocks American superheroes is not very different from how it parodies Jung's martial arts novels. However, in the larger scale of things, the free mixing of cultural images in Kung Fu Hustle complicates what critics have discussed as the core periphery structure in cultural globalization. That is, the Euro-American world occupies the position of a global influence, whereas the rest of the world are localized cultures being influenced. Whereas Kung Fu Hustle does assimilate a lot of influences from Western films, it does not position them as superior or even different from its own local or traditional heritages. As all traditions and influences mingle indiscriminately, there is neither center nor periphery. In fact, in our next lecture, we further address how Kung Fu Hustle is a direct inspiration of Kung Fu Panda. This lineage reflects a countercultural flow, by which Eastern influences are assimilated by American pop culture. It's a countercultural flow since it reverses the core periphery relations typically underlying usually West-based theories of cultural globalization. There are in fact many other examples of this countercultural flow, from Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan's martial arts films to the influences of Japanese manga and anime. As an homage to Kung Fu films, Kung Fu Hustle also combines different filming techniques, from wide-angle, real action scenes to surreal CGI animations. Stephen Chow took great care to gather various Hong Kong Kung Fu stars in the cast. The three working-class heroes are portrayed by established martial arts fighters. Combining old-school Kung Fu fighting with action scenes based on computer-generated special effects, Kung Fu Hustle offers a commentary on the changing technology of martial arts films. Finally, if we look deeply enough, there is a great deal of traditional philosophical influences in the film. The story is very much about how Sing retrieves his original goodness, which may easily remind us of Mengzi's argument that human nature is inherently good, even though it can be corrupted by a negative social environment. Mirroring the historical Kowloon walled city, the world Sing lives in is a dystopian setting, and he copies the image of gangsters for a false image of power. Yet his original goodness is made clear by a childhood episode when he tried to help the mute girl fight against bullies. Later, one moment that awakens Sing's inner goodness is when the gangsters are about to set fire on the mother and her child. Sing realizes the evil of the gang at this point, and the three hidden martial masters could not help but to save the mother and child. This reminds us of Mengzi's thought experiment about a child who is about to fall into a well, and how any true human being would naturally feel distressed and want to save the child. Sing finally transforms his conscience into action by helping the landlord and the landlady in their fight against the beast. He pays a terrible price for it, and should have been dead if not for the film's miraculous revelations. Through his near-death state, Sing is able to unleash his inner power and becomes the One. This plot hints on rebirth and transformation. Sing's resolve to sacrifice himself, following the model of the earlier three martial arts heroes, certainly also embody the Confucian principle of integrity or Yi. In fact, this scene includes the image of a butterfly coming out of a cocoon, which alludes to the famous Taoist allegory of the butterfly dream in Zhuangzi. While questioning if life is a dream, the story of the butterfly dream also suggests the possibility of seeing death or the destruction of the old self as an opportunity for rebirth. We can clearly see this symbolism in this scene in Kung Fu Hustle. Going along with this plot is the interesting role of the martial arts manual Buddha's poem, 如来神掌, the young Sing bought from a beggar. The manual was supposed to be fake, resulting in his decision to become a bad person since nothing in the world looks trustworthy. However, what happens later seems to suggest the manual has been true all along, except that its power can only be released through Sing's willingness to listen to his own heart and to sacrifice himself for what's right. So is the manual true or fake after all? And what's the ultimate source of Sing's power? I hope to see how you might approach these questions. Finally, even though the apparent plot of Kung Fu Hustle is based on The Matrix, its spirit very much corresponds to that of The Monkey King. Stephen Chow has a deep connection to the Journey to the West, as indicated by his innovative adaptations of the novel in the Chinese Odyssey films. In the 2010s, Stephen Chow directed two films based on the Journey to the West, Conquering Demons and The Demons Strike Back, which are again bold and creative adaptations with rich Buddhist underpinnings. Kung Fu Hustle's reference to the Journey to the West is not explicit, but we may sense it from the idea of the Buddha's palm and Sing's transformation. Similar to the monkey, Sing is an outcast, being deceived and looked down upon by the world around him, and he came to be driven by a false notion of power. However, through the crisis he experienced with the community of the pigsty, similar to the trials the monkey goes through his pilgrimage, Sing transforms and learns about the value of self-sacrifice. Upon this moment, he becomes an enlightened being, and as the final battle of the film shows, becomes a Buddha. The film ends with a meeting between Sing and the mute girl, and the image symbolizing their friendship and romance, the lollipop. The mute girl is clearly an image of innocence. Her silence could mean that she is detached from social pollution or the world of language that's too often used to deceive. Perhaps she also embodies Sing's hidden goodness. As to the lollipop, it certainly evokes the idea of childhood innocence. Its shape as a circle also reminds us of the Taiji symbol. In fact, the ending of the film resembles that of a dream, as all characters live lives similar to but also different from their experiences throughout the film. This cyclical nature is further enhanced with the reappearance of the beggar selling the Buddha's palm manual to other children. Maybe this ending suggests the whole film is a dream, or that the story of the film is about eternal pattern of life. I look forward to your interpretations. Overall, Kung Fu Hustle is a culmination of Stephen Chow's art as the king of comedy. Beyond laughter itself, it's laden with philosophical and aesthetic themes. Sing's transformation and the theme of sacrifice and innocence all echo the idea of the power of emptiness. In our next lecture, which is also the last lecture for this class, we'll move into the topic of Kung Fu Panda and discuss how this animated film series inherits the legacy of Chinese Kung Fu films in thoughtful and meaningful ways, indicating a new stage in global cultural relations between China and the West.